Right now in Pyongyang, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is walking the red carpet with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un. A face-to-face meeting between these two is rare, and this particular trip marks a strange shift in their relationship. The last time Xi visited, Kim's position was incredibly weak. He walked away from nuclear talks. Soon after, he sealed his borders. That decision severed trade with Beijing, leaving his economy isolated and totally dependent on whatever lifeline China was willing to offer. But the atmosphere of this summit is different. Instead of issuing instructions to a struggling junior partner, Xi is now having to actively court Kim, navigating a relationship where the usual hierarchy between patron and client has become increasingly fragile. Publicly, Beijing wants this summit to project a united front. By standing shoulder to shoulder with allies, Xi aims to present China as a global stabilizing force, deliberately contrasting his predictable statecraft against a chaotic, tariff-imposing Washington. Privately, Chinese officials are dealing with a severe diplomatic headache. They rely on North Korea as a compliant buffer state on their border, and right now they are terrified of losing control over Kim's volatile behavior. That panic is entirely Kim's doing. By taking advantage of the global turmoil caused by the war in Ukraine, he has found a way to step out of Beijing's shadow. He used a moment of international desperation to build out his options. The isolated client state figured out how to play two massive superpowers against each other. To understand how Kim pulled this off, you have to look 4,000 miles away from Beijing. He applied a classic strategy of wedge politics by looking toward Moscow. In 2024, North Korea and Russia revived a mutual defense pledge dating back to the Cold War, officially binding their strategic interests together. This new alliance is entirely transactional. On one side, Russia was burning through resources in Ukraine. Moscow desperately needed massive amounts of artillery, munitions, and even fresh troops to sustain its fighting. Kim happily supplied those soldiers and weapons. In return, Vladimir Putin injected billions of dollars worth of oil, food, and highly advanced weapons technology directly into the North Korean economy. This animated map shows exactly how that transaction broke Beijing's monopoly. For years, almost all physical goods and foreign currency entering North Korea had to pass through China. Now a massive influx of resources flows straight across the Russian border, bypassing Chinese trade routes entirely. Notice how the supply line from Russia thickens. Because Kim no longer relies on a single patron to keep his country fed and fueled, China cannot threaten to cut off his supply to force his compliance. By securing a second heavily armed sponsor, the regime achieved its ultimate goal. North Korea can finally survive without asking Beijing for permission. Instead of just resting on this new Russian wealth, Kim is actively using it to squeeze Beijing. He wants to be treated as an equal partner, and he's demanding serious economic concessions. Specifically, he is pressing China to fund sanction-proof investments. Tourism is one of the few sectors not restricted by the United Nations, so Kim is pouring money into sprawling seafront resorts and mountain hot springs, expecting Chinese tourists to fill them. Chinese officials are largely playing along. They have already restored train services and commercial flights between Beijing and Pyongyang. If they refuse Kim's requests, they risk watching their historic border buffer fully align itself with Moscow. This economic bidding war also protects his most important asset, his rapidly expanding atomic infrastructure. The United States has repeatedly signaled a desire to restart talks. Kim flatly refuses to put his arsenal on the negotiating table. He looks at the recent conflict with Iran and concludes that the moment a nation slows down its weapons program, it invites an American invasion. A decade ago, that paranoia would have been met with global resistance. Chinese and Russian diplomats sat in this very room at the UN Security Council, voting alongside the United States to impose sweeping sanctions on Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions. Today, that consensus is dead. Beijing and Moscow are so focused on their own proxy battles against Washington that they have completely dropped the demand for denuclearization. Last year, Putin even stated publicly that Pyongyang has the right to strengthen its own defense. Kim's bidding war successfully converted his munitions exports into a form of political currency. He has achieved what once seemed impossible, a nuclear arsenal that both Beijing and Moscow are now willing to tolerate. Which brings us back to Pyongyang. Behind the smiles and camera flashes, an intense geopolitical chess match is playing out.
Beijing realizes there is zero strategic value in helping Washington contain the North Korean threat. The Chinese government prefers to keep Pyongyang armed and unpredictable as leverage against American influence in the region. But that strategy cuts both ways. Xi is now quietly struggling to restrain a neighbor whose aggressive missile tests risk driving South Korea and Japan to build their own nuclear arsenals. Kim Jong Un saw two superpowers desperate to challenge the West, charging them both for his cooperation. He turned his isolation into absolute strategic sovereignty. This leaves the Pacific with a new, volatile reality. A nuclear-armed North Korea, newly stabilized and strategically independent, now operates without a leash from anyone.